Welcome to the Pharma Forum podcast. This is web editor Nicole Raleigh, and today I have with me Liz Beatty, co-founder and chief strategy officer of Inato, a clinical trial marketplace company. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you, Nicole.
So today we'll be discussing trends in the year ahead, as well as looking more closely at the role that AI will be playing in life sciences going forwards. Before we dive into all that though, Liz, perhaps you could share with listeners a little bit about your journey and the path and the passions that led you to do what you do today at Inato.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. So I started in clinical research right out of college as a study coordinator at Yale. I didn't know much about clinical research at the time, but I had a gap year between my undergraduate and medical school, and a physician I had worked with in the past reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to come back and work at his lab during that period of time. I declined because I really needed to be in a situation where I had more interactions with people. So he actually introduced me to clinical research and connected me with the multiple sclerosis clinic at Yale, where I could be directly engaging with patients as a study coordinator. I was 100% hooked on clinical research after this. There was nothing like talking with patients about their own disease progression and how clinical trials could be a good option for them for their future and helping them manage their disease in the future. I learned so much about the importance of clinical research for bringing new medicines to market and how much people needed these new medicines for a lot of diseases that existed without, good solutions for patients in the market. After that, I never looked back. I went into Bristol Myers Squibb in my next major career move, and I had various roles in clinical operations. So being at a large pharmaceutical company, it gave me an opportunity to really learn all the ins and outs of drug development, from site management, protocol management, recruitment and retention. So again, going back to the patients and what someone's journey looks like to become part of a trial and stay in a trial over time. And then my last role at Bristol Myers Squibb was focused on digital innovation. I led the digital clinical trials team, which was a great opportunity for me to learn about innovation and how to be an entrepreneur in a really large matrix pharmaceutical company. But the opportunity existed that we could do research better, that we could bring innovation and technology into research and fix some of the problems that had plagued drug development for a long time. And I really got excited about what technology could bring in this area. And this is why I ended up, after leaving Bristol Myers Squibb, co-founding Inato, because I wanted the opportunity to take on those challenges head on and take it on through a new lens in a technology company where I could innovate and move really quickly. And being in a startup gave me that opportunity to address some of these longstanding problems that existed in clinical trials. So some of the key points that made my journey so impactful is around the patient. From Yale to Bristol Myers Squibb to what we do at Inato, I've been really focused on the impact of research for patients and the importance of new medicines for patients. However, when you look at drug development over the years, the same problems have persisted. Less than 5% of people participate in trials. Less than 4% of trials are representative of the people who receive those medicines when that drug comes to market. So there are major problems for patients that exist in the ecosystem around drug development, and that's what we're really excited to address at Inato. So Inato was founded around the concept of bringing clinical trials to all patients, regardless of where they live, through their trusted doctor and care team. We felt really strongly that the role of the doctor, the nurse, the study coordinator, all of those people at the research center were so critical to a patient's journey and willingness to be in a clinical trial. So we've really built our technology around helping research go beyond the traditional centers into the community where there are trusted doctors and care teams that can help patients navigate this part of their journey and see if clinical trials are the right fit for them. So at Inato, we have a marketplace, as you mentioned. It's a technology offering for clinical trials where we have the researchers on one end and the pharmaceutical companies on the other. And the technology helps to allow clinical researchers in the community get access to trials for them and their patients that are the right fit for them and their patients. So this is helping to improve access to people in their local communities with research that's happening in clinical trials so that they don't have to go long distance or change doctors to participate in clinical research. And this really helps improve access for patients and representative trials as well, because more patients in their community have access. So we can have the data that's collected in clinical trials really be representative of the people who will receive those medicines in the future.
Thank you, Liz. Quite a journey, and as you say, patient-centered all the way, seemingly. So thank you for that. Let's unpack some of it now and sort of lean towards some of the key trends, perhaps. So you recently provided some thought leadership to our platform at Pharma Forum, and in that byline, you suggested that we'll be seeing the beginnings of a new era in drug development, brought on by, as you've been explaining, key technological advances. Namely, of course, that's AI. However, you also mentioned another trend making headlines, one which our listeners will certainly be familiar with, and that is to say GLP-1s. And you looked at the competition there in that space. So I was wondering, for the purposes of this podcast, whether you could elaborate for us now on what you predict will unfold in the GLP-1 space this year.
Happy to. So there's a lot of buzz around GLP-1s in the industry right now. And that's because the market opportunity is so large. Already, 1 in 8 US adults have taken a GLP-1. The global market is projected to reach $100 billion by 2030. So this is a huge opportunity for drug developers in this space. But we've seen with Eli Lilly and Novo that there's been a clear first mover advantage. They are already in market and they'll be there before others can even catch up. This creates a much higher bar then to be relevant for other drug makers, for patients and payers. This will be a pivotal year for GLP-1 makers, though, and we'll see a lot of clinical trial activity to bring additional drugs to market since this opportunity is so large, projected to be $100 billion by 2030. However, what I see is that it won't be the same way of doing clinical research that can get these drug makers to be competitive in the space. They'll need to do things differently. Historically, it's taken almost a decade to bring a new drug to market, and about half of that time is in clinical trials. So for drug makers to stay competitive in this space and bring new GLP-1s to market, they'll need to embrace innovation in clinical trials. They'll need to reduce efficiencies and make sure that they're really being thoughtful about how to cut time and bring these drugs to market faster, since Lilly and Novo have such a first mover advantage in the space. So what I think will happen is we won't see incremental productivity improvements, but we'll be looking for big sweeping changes and how to transform clinical trials to be much faster to market for new GLP-1s. And things like AI have a really important role to play here in transforming how clinical trials are done in the future.
Thank you, Liz. So you've spoken about speed to market, coming faster to market during our conversation today. You've also touched upon, certainly in explaining your journey for us, the issue of access for patients when we're considering the patients within clinical trials. Now, historically, large urban academic centres have conducted the majority of clinical trials, which has led to such issues as you've been explaining, such as inaccessibility, lack of representation, and again, intense competition for participants. Now, with growing industry pressure for greater trial access, 2025, as again you suggested in your byline that you published with us, will bring a more focused effort to bring research into communities. So perhaps you could expand on that for us, that necessity there.
Yes. So what we've seen is that about 5% of sites conduct 70% of trials. So historically, pharmaceutical companies and CROs have gone to the same clinical research centers over and over again. And we've seen this really providing a problem around competition. So if everyone's doing their clinical trials at the same research centers, there's competition that exists in the market for those same sets of patients. And it becomes a really big problem to conduct trials on time and hit our recruitment and enrollment goals that are set at the beginning of the trial. So what we're predicting is this shift to allow access into the community This is where the patients are receiving care, and this is a great opportunity for pharmaceutical companies to improve enrollment overall by accessing community research centers who are interested in being a part of clinical trials and have access to patients that have historically been left out of clinical trials in the past. Now, some of this can seem risky for the pharmaceutical companies because they'll need to go to centers that maybe they haven't worked with as much in the past, that don't have as much experience as some of the major academic centers. But the amount of competition and congestion that exists in the system today is really making it worth it for the pharmaceutical companies to expand access into community and make sure that their clinical trials are available to patients where they live. And I think this is a really important point because we know that recruiting and enrolling patients is one of the top bottlenecks in the research process. And recruitment accounts for about a third of clinical trial costs, and 1 in 5 trials don't recruit enough patients, and many don't meet their recruitment timelines. So this is putting pressure on industry to say we have to do things differently in the future. We have to bring research where the patients are, and instead of expecting the patients to come to the major academic centers to receive care, which is not what is happening today.
Absolutely. Which brings us to my next point, which is AI, of course. So when AI is discussed, there seems little that it can't be applied to in terms of what we've been discussing about ameliorating speed and efficacy and indeed specificity. So I was wondering if you could expand on the possibilities of AI for us, Liz, whilst obviously avoiding groundless hype, but explaining just why it is that these advanced technologies really are the way forward for the patient.
And I'll say, I think what we've seen and what we've heard is there is a lot of hype and excitement around AI in drug discovery. We're even seeing that this is a projected market that's expected to grow from about $1.5 billion all the way up to $13 billion by 2032. And this excitement is warranted, to be honest with you. There's a huge potential for AI to help with scientific breakthroughs in drug discovery. However, drug discovery, if we make all this advancement, will lead to further bottlenecks in drug development and clinical trials. So if we get new drug candidates through AI to come forward in the discovery part of the process, but we don't make any improvements in clinical trials, we're only going to continue to have the same bottleneck we have today of slowing down getting new drugs to market because the clinical trials still take too long. A decade is far too much to spend on bringing a drug to market. And many of these drugs cost more than $1 billion to get through the full drug development process. So if we accelerate recovery without performing clinical trials, we won't be able to get these new medicines to patients faster. So this is where I think we will really need to focus on how do we bring opportunities in AI into development. And there are many opportunities to be much more efficient in our development processes and clinical trials overall. And AI unlocks that for us today. I'll share that 18 months ago, AI wasn't as advanced as it is today. What's happened in technology has given us the opportunity to do much more advanced things with AI than we could before. And it's unlocking new potentials in clinical trials that we can make research much more efficient for the future. So if we double click on the patient piece again, which I think is a really important part of what's broken in the clinical trial process today, many people have a willingness to participate in trials, and they're actually never discussed or brought up a clinical trial in the journey of their care. So this is a gap for us that needs to be addressed. So if very few people are ever approached about a clinical trial, they'll never have the decision in front of them of whether or not it's a good fit for them. And this is where technology can really change that process for us. Because many trials historically were at these major academic centers and people were not receiving their care there, there's an opportunity for us to expand access into the community and then use AI to bring those efficiencies forward about how do we make sure we understand the patient's journey over time, when is the right moment that they could be eligible for a clinical trial, and provide the right tools for the researchers to be able to communicate those trial opportunities forward to patients. So this is where we see AI can really change the dynamic and reduce a lot of the burden, both for the clinical research site and ultimately the patient, to learn about trials, get access to trials, and consider these as opportunities as part of their care. So this is, some of the great potential that exists today. To be specific about how this could look in the future, right now, many pharmaceutical companies use data-driven approaches to select which centers they'll bring a clinical trial to. We can now make this much broader than just the major academic centers with AI, so that you can be much more strategic in thinking about not only who has the right experience, capabilities, medical expertise to run the trial, but actually who has the right access to patients. And how do we bring that into the equation in data-driven site selection? So that's one component. The next component that I see AI having a big impact on is around matching patients to trials. So there's a lot of time spent today, and to go back to my days as a study coordinators spend time reviewing patient charts. So even if you have an electronic health system and medical records, you only can get so far into each patient's medical records through SQL queries and medical record searches. You need a person then to do the last review of eligibility. Each inclusion/exclusion criteria in the protocol needs to be reviewed and determined, is this patient a good fit for that particular trial? And historically, this could take, for complex studies and large patient records, hours of a study coordinator's time to get through one chart review for a patient to determine eligibility. This is where AI has a great potential for us for the future, where because the medical reasoning and because the amount of timeline recognition and detail AI can now compute and rationalize through patient records, it can unlock huge efficiencies for study coordinators to do a lot of that work for them. And we have a much more scalable process where we can have patient chart reviews automated and bring the right data forward for the study coordinator instead of spending so many hours of their time doing that work as they do today. So we see this as a huge potential. And then the third piece where I'm get really excited is that patient's journey over time. So we know that there are many disease areas like oncology, where there's a progression of the disease, even multiple sclerosis, where I started in my career, where patients progress over time and may or may not be eligible in this moment for a clinical trial, but could, in the months ahead, be a good candidate for a study. Could we use technology to really map that patient's journey, stay connected to what's happening with that person's care over time, and then help the researcher, the doctor, the nurse, the study coordinator at the right moment of time to say, look, this patient now is eligible for this particular trial, and why don't we bring this back for discussion as part of their decisions in their own care journey over time. So I think from start to finish, there's an opportunity for AI to really be impactful in making it much more accessible for people to learn about clinical trials and to make sure it's the right moment of time in their care journey to be a candidate for each clinical trial that might be available.
Thank you, Liz. It's been a pleasure.
And so that concludes another episode of the Pharma Forum podcast. You can find more information about this episode, including a download link and information about previous installments at pharmaforum.com/podcasts. The Pharma Forum podcast is also available on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon Music, Podbean, and pretty much wherever you get your other podcasts. Just search for Pharma Forum and press subscribe. Of course, don't forget to visit our website itself, where you can sign up for daily and weekly news and analysis bulletins. And do follow us as well on X or Twitter and LinkedIn at Pharma Forum. That's all for now. Thank you for listening.